Hi, it's Rachel. I want to share with you a little bit what I'm learning about the tree of life. Okay, in Revelation 22:14 it says, "Blessed are those who do his commandments." And what are the commandments that he gave us? To love one another. That they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter through the gates into the city. Okay, I've been talking about how the tree of life, we take part of the tree of life, that is moving you into eternity. Okay, it is becoming a part of the kingdom of heaven, and that's this entering into the gates into the city. And remember, I talked about too how the way that you enter into the gate, it's in your spirit. Okay, it's by your spirit, it's having a pure spirit, purified vessel, a pure soul. So all that is of corruption is pushed out. Okay, so you've been cleansed by the word of truth. And in that, you're able to receive and be a outlet, a vessel through which the righteousness of God can flow. And it is something that we always have to be connected to his righteousness. Okay, and that is very key of what it means to be partaking of the tree of life. So, this partaking of the tree of life is very important. So, we see back in the garden, okay, this is where it's first introduced. And it's interesting that this tree of life is at the very beginning and it's at the very end. I mean, it's mentioned in the very last chapter, Revelation 22, and it's the second chapter in Genesis 2, okay? And it says in verse 9, "And out of the ground the Lord made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." The difference between the tree of life and the knowledge of good and evil is basically about our wisdom and our understanding, thus our righteousness. Righteousness is doing the right thing. It is knowing what to do in that moment, okay, in whatever moment, whatever situation, whatever relationship. So when you are partaking of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that is saying that you are obtaining your own wisdom so that you have your own intelligence, your own wisdom that is of you, and by that you judge what is good and what is evil. Okay, you are now being judged, and all of us live this way. Most every single one of us, this is what we do. Okay, it's just how we're structured, how this world, how we're raised, that's how we think. Okay, that is what we're taught to do. And that's why when they ate of it, it says, let's see. Okay. It says in chapter 3:22, it's of Genesis, it says, "Then the Lord God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us to know good and evil. And now, lest he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever." So the tree of life brings eternal life. Okay? But the problem is that when they chose to go their own way against God, they were choosing their own wisdom, their own understanding, making their own judgment that was contrary to what God had told them. Okay, and in that they were judging now what they deemed good and evil. All right, and that's what he means by that. That they are judging that like God, but God is all knowing. He sees all, knows all, is perfect. So his judgments are always perfect. He truly knows the right thing to do in every situation. We do not, because we're not all knowing. Okay, and that's what we have to come to understand. So this is where people it's very easy to get confused, because as you start growing in the wisdom and the knowledge of God, really what you're doing is becoming a purified vessel, okay? So you're moving out all the things contrary to God's love, right? I've mentioned that before, the resentment and bitterness and judging and all these other things. Okay, so really what we gain and hold is all we are is cleansed. Okay, we're just a cleansed cup. That's it. But we do not have our own righteousness. We can't. And that's what when you start to learn that, you're starting to learn the difference between the knowledge of good and evil and eating of that tree where you have your own wisdom and you can act on that, versus you're always reliant on the wisdom of God. Because for every moment, every situation that I'm in, okay, to know what the perfect, loving, right thing is to do that has a perfect ripple effect, all these things that I cannot see, how can I know that? I can't. So I am completely dependent upon the righteousness of God all the time. It doesn't matter how purified I become, how much I understand about the nature of God, because the moments are dynamic and they affect so many different things. So when it comes to our actions, we are totally dependent on the righteousness of God. And when you understand that, you're starting to partake of the tree of life, where you're saying, you know what, God, I need your righteousness every moment, all the time. Apart from you, I can do nothing. That's what Jesus taught in John 15:5. Apart from the vine, the branch can do nothing. Okay, that's also what his blood is, the life blood that goes through our veins. It's partaking of his flesh and his spirit. It's saying, I cannot within myself know what is right. It's like I always have to be connected to God and trusting that he's going to lead me and establish my thoughts so his righteousness can flow through. And how you get to that point is by knowing that you have a very pure mind. Because once you have a pure mind, okay, then you can start being a venue for that righteousness. Because otherwise, if you have resentments in there and judgment and lies and false images of God, that righteousness can't flow through you. How can it? Because your mind is producing things contrary to it. So that's why we have to seek to have the mind of Christ. That is our part, that is our walk, is seeking out that purification. But that doesn't mean that we have the righteousness. So when we learn that we always have to have God's righteousness for every moment, that meaning his wisdom, knowing what the right thing is to do, the most loving thing to do, then we're understanding what it means to eat of the tree of life and to choose the tree of life. Because in the ways of righteousness is life and there is no death. Okay, so that's what it's talking about. So when you go into the Proverbs, like in Proverbs 18, it says, she talking about wisdom, okay? God's wisdom. Again, that's a very dynamic thing, that because we're constantly growing as well and expanding. So if you're constantly growing, expanding in love, then that wisdom that you're capable of handling and receiving, understanding, is also growing. Okay, so you can't depend on how you responded a week ago for this situation. One, is a different situation, and two, you're always growing and expanding, so you're at a different level of awareness than you were then, so that will cause you to act even differently. Okay? So in verse 18 of chapter 3, it says, she is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all those who retain her. That is seeking the wisdom of God. And again, it's something we are always dependent on. Always. Every moment. In chapter 11 of Proverbs, verse 30, it says, the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life. The righteousness, if you have that righteousness, that's where it's tying. The righteousness that you have is the tree of life. Okay? Because you're connected to life, the source of life, all the time. You're always dependent on that righteousness. Okay. The chapter 13, verse 12, it says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. But when the desire comes, okay, the fulfillment of that hope, it is a tree of life. Your hopes, okay, for the whatever it is in your life, okay, we all have different hopes for things. When they are truly fulfilled, when that desire is fulfilled, it comes from, is a part of the tree of life, meaning it's the perfect righteousness of God coming in and truly fulfilling that hope in the perfect way. God's ways are always perfect, and his ways are so far beyond our ways. And that's the other thing, his thoughts are beyond our thoughts, because he knows so much more. That's why we can't lean on our own understanding, but we have to lean on his. No matter what your spiritual maturity is, you will have to rely on it for eternity, always. And that's what they didn't understand in the garden. They thought somehow they could make their own decision, they could have that their own choice, they could walk in it, that would be the better way. Wouldn't it make sense? Well, maybe if I had my own wisdom, I could choose, I could know what to do, I wouldn't have to be reliant on God. But that's the wrong choice, as you understand, because we can't have our own righteousness. It's impossible because we're not all-knowing. All right? So when the desire comes, it's fulfilled in the perfect way, and it's part of that tree of life. And when you look in, let's see if I can find that verse. I might not be able to find it, but it talks about how those trees, in chapter of Revelation 22, verse 2, it says, in the middle of its street and on either side of the river was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. Okay? That desire, when your hope is fulfilled, that desire is this healing. Okay? It's of your soul, of your flesh, of your mind, of your life, because you're becoming more in line with the Spirit of God and everything that is beautiful and perfect and true. All right, so you're getting an understanding that this tree of life and partaking of that is partaking of that righteousness. That means you have to put all what you think of, depending on your own wisdom, your own intellect, what you've learned, you've got to put that aside. You have to become like a little child. A little child. And that's why in Matthew 18, Jesus says in verse 3, assuredly I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Okay, little children, they're totally dependent on their parents' instruction, in leading, in guidance, in counsel, in protection, in oversight, everything. Okay, that's what it's mean. You can't feel like, you're okay, now I've learned the wisdom and the ways of God. Now I can go work out of that. Okay, you become like this little child, realizing, wow, I've walked through all this understanding and I've gained a lot of wisdom and insight and understanding that has been to purify me. But that's been its purpose. But for that wisdom that I need to know what to do in this moment, the righteous act, the right act, the one that's in line with God, the one that keeps perfect peace, that allows me to be a peacemaker in situations, that has to be flowing. That's that stream of righteousness that comes into your life. And when you have that understanding, that's how you feel. You feel like a little child that is very dependent on their father for everything. But that's exactly the humility, the state of our soul, that being poor in spirit, as it says, the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's realizing that separate from him, you don't have that righteousness. You can be purified and cleansed and sanctified, but you have to have that righteousness flowing into your life. And again, because we're always growing and every situation is different, it has to be a constant stream that we're constantly dependent upon that. But when you have that relationship and that unity with God, it is the most powerful thing that you can do in a very powerful place in your weakness of being like a child, that you don't even know what to do in the situation. That is the humility that's needed to move into the kingdom of heaven, to where your gate, your soul, your vessel can now receive that flowing stream of the righteousness of God as a continual stream for all eternity.